Hi, this is Anthony. Welcome back to my show. Let's jump right into today's D.B. Cooper question and answer video. In a recent video, I discussed my thoughts on finishing reading the book by author Max Gunther called D.B. Cooper, What Really Happened. I further explained that while I had some concerns about certain things that I read, I wanted to see if there was other information supporting my thoughts or additional concerns about the book that I had missed. So I asked Bard AI, which is a Google software AI product, kind of like ChatGPT, about concerns relative to the book. I explained in that video that part of its answer said that the source of the information for the book was somebody named Robert Rackley. Now, I did not recall this name in the book, and in fact, the source described in the book was Clara, the eventual wife of the identified D.B. Cooper character. And in fact, just Googling that name, Robert Rackley, in connection with D.B. Cooper, there's nothing on the internet at all. I pointed out that Robert Rackley is quite close to Robert Rackstraw, who was identified as a potential suspect, and some people still believe he was, but generally the Cooper sphere does not consider him to now be a credible candidate. I have a whole video on him, which is episode 257. Check out that one if you're interested. And after I produced and uploaded that video, I went back and asked Bard about this Robert Rackley and if it could provide any more information. It couldn't. It couldn't provide any information about anybody with that name, especially in connection with the D.B. Cooper case or the Max Gunther book, obviously showing some limitations on free AI tools. Anyway, I suppose that's kind of a long answer to your question that I received from Dave, but it's a very important one, so thank you. I get a lot of comments about either specific suspects or what are thought to be facts about the D.B. Cooper case. If you're watching this video and you're like me, you're interested in this case. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be watching the video. So if you're interested in this case, you would like it to be solved. Now, if you're a reader of fiction and like detective novels or mysteries, what is the one characteristic that they all have? They're all solved. I would guess that fiction authors probably do not write unsolved mysteries. Now, obviously, for people like myself, books that are nonfiction about unsolved cases are quite interesting. And a book about the D.B. Cooper case, laying out the case for one suspect or all of them, is interesting. As we all are a disparate community, we want the case to be solved, and we want the FBI to continue to be active in looking at the case, looking at every clue that people may be able to find these days, as well as publicly and clearly excluding candidates that they do not believe to have been Cooper. But that's not generally how the FBI or government or police agencies work. Think about the court system and a trial. Generally, what are the two outcomes of a jury trial? The defendant is either guilty or not guilty. And really, we should be more clear because it is said that they are found guilty or found not guilty, which is really different than the previous sentence. Because we are dealing with a jury, generally of 12 people, that are taking in information from two different sides and then trying to come up with the truth of the matter as far as someone's guilt. And that's guilt according to the law, and sometimes things like statute of limitations or insanity may impact the outcome. We all know of high-profile individuals who were no doubt guilty of something, but because they had good lawyers who could sow doubt in the minds of some jurors, that the individual was found not guilty. It doesn't mean that they were not guilty. So in the eyes of our legal system, they are not guilty, but really they were found to be not guilty by a jury, even though intelligent people can reason that the person was in fact guilty. And sometimes people are found not guilty simply due to technicalities where the police forgot to read Miranda rights or did not get the proper search warrant or the date on the search warrant was an error or some things like that. That a reasonable person understands does not negate the fact that the person actually committed the crime. Now, sometimes there are cases where somebody was found to be guilty and sentenced to life in prison many years ago, and then DNA evidence turns up that completely exonerates them, and the government admits that the person was innocent. But generally, innocence is not a term that is used by the legal system. Our various branches of government want to be very cautious in how things are termed so that they have an out for them if a mistake is made. And whether certain candidates really have been cleared by the FBI is certainly up for debate, unless you can find an actual FBI document or public statement clearing a particular person. But if you go through what is publicly available, and I've looked at some of it, but not all of it because there's a lot of it out there, the FBI investigated hundreds and hundreds of tips concerning individuals thought to possibly have been D.B. Cooper. Whether you think about the quality of the work of the FBI, perhaps they dropped the ball on some things, including perhaps losing the cigarette butts. I think you need to be very cautious about thinking that there is some high-level conspiracy within the FBI to hide the fact that they knew who Cooper was. I've had people write to me in the past, and I've covered this in previous videos, where they think that Cooper was the son of a high-ranking government official and the FBI therefore was covering it up to protect that individual. But would the FBI do that? And who would that individual be? You have to remember that the 1970s were a time when the vice president was investigated for tax evasion and removed from office, and eventually the president left office due to the Watergate cover-up. And the FBI investigated members of Congress in the Abscam investigations. So I think that there's plenty of evidence that the FBI was willing to investigate the very highest reaches of government. That would seem to me to counter any argument that some important person's son was D.B. Cooper and the whole thing was just covered up by the FBI, unbeknownst to all the agents who investigated leaks, including ones who were obsessed by the case and wrote books about it. So when it comes to Cooper and possible suspects, the FBI has looked at probably everybody that's been suggested, with the exception of perhaps the most recent suspects, Vince Peterson and Milton Vordahl. If the FBI thought any of the people that were on their radar were Cooper, they would have continued investigating them. So I guess the point here is the FBI is reluctant to publicly clear potential candidates until they have a suspect to charge. But since their investigation is for the most part suspended, in particular because Cooper, if he survived the jump, which I think is likely that he did not, but I'm open to the possibility that he did, and if he was still alive, he'd be approximately 95 years old today and doesn't possess or pose any more of a threat to the airline industry. Even if he did survive the jump, it's likely that he would have died sometime between 1971 and 2023. With all the things going on in the world, the FBI has their hands full in dealing with domestic terrorists, Chinese and Russian espionage taking place in the United States, cyber crimes, child trafficking, illegal drugs, and the importation of stolen antiquities. They have their hands full of many actual ongoing crimes. It does not make sense for them to devote any resources to pursuing the D.B. Cooper case, despite all of us wishing that they would. One of the things that I try to encourage my viewers to do is to really look at this case through clear eyes and think about means and motives, which are always looked at by investigators. And also look at the clues, but make sure that you are looking at actual clues and not just what's been reported, but inadvertently distorted over time. Even the name of the main suspect, which most people believe was made up, was not even D.B. Cooper. It was Dan Cooper. That's what was written on his plane ticket. But a reporter got it wrong, and that's now what we commonly use to refer to the case. And when you do a deeper dive into this case, as I've done over the past year or so, you see many, many things are misreported, only partially reported, or there's serious doubt as to the accuracy of something. For instance, his shoes were reported to be loafers, but perhaps not penny loafers like we think of them today. They may have been sturdier shoes that zipped up on the side, rather than being tied in the front, which led to the reporting witness to assume that they were slip-on loafers. Witnesses are not 100% in agreement on even the color of his suit, other than it was some darker color. We do have a tie that most people believe he wore and left behind on the plane, but trust me, not everyone is in agreement that it was even his tie. And for the people that believe that it was his tie, some people believe that it was a red herring left behind to throw off researchers. It's now been analyzed, and various exotic materials have been found on it. Some people believe that the tie was bought at a used clothing store or something along those lines, perhaps to throw off investigators, although it wouldn't be until after the start of the 21st century that the tie would be analyzed with an electron microscope. Others believe that the tie that he wore to do his job, and that he just left it inadvertently behind, not as a clue, but because he didn't want it flapping around his face when he jumped out, and he took it off and somehow inadvertently forgot to put it in his pocket or whatever. And even what precisely has been found on the tie is a matter of dispute, and certain materials may point in one direction, but actually when you talk to experts who actually worked in the high-tech fields in the 1960s and 70s, they can often point out certain things which actually clarify or dispute certain assumptions, which can then point us in a different direction. I bring all of this up because if you're not using actual facts and processing it through logical, unbiased thinking, then your conclusions may not be accurate. If you're watching any of my videos concerning the Somerton man, you'll know what I mean. Just briefly, that was a case in Australia when an unidentified man was found dead on the beach back in the late 1940s. There were many mysterious clues pointing to him and to other people. Eventually, a book containing what might have been some type of code connected to him was found. He was connected to a nurse who lived nearby who may have spoken Russian, according to her daughter, and may have been part of a Soviet spy ring. The individual that was found was determined to have been poisoned, so perhaps he was liquidated by the Soviets, and for many decades a lot of theories swirled about him. And since they had the body, they were able to do DNA testing on some hairs and connected it through online genetic genealogy to a candidate who is now believed to be that individual. It turns out he was probably just a lonely divorced man who was looking for his ex-wife, gave up, and took his own life. Nothing connecting him to atomic espionage or anything exotic like that. But what this shows us is all the facts and clues that we think we know about Dan Cooper could well be leading us in the wrong direction if we ever find out who he was, without a doubt. As I close here, I want to point out a recent video that I saw. It was an interview with Michael Shermer, who is the founder and editor of Skeptic magazine. He's written a number of books on how to think clearly, and his most recent one is called Conspiracy. In this interview, which was with an ex-Mormon book club, he talks about cults and conspiracies and conspiratorial thinking. The value in reading such books or learning about it is to try to get the individual to think about things as clearly as possible. If you look at something with open eyes and things seem to contradict your currently held beliefs, then you need to be adult enough and intellectually honest enough with yourself to consider that some of your beliefs might be incorrect. Now, I don't want to get off on religion or politics where this can be touched upon, but I want you, my dear viewers, to keep this in mind when you look at the D.B. Cooper case. I have to admit that when I first saw Dan Gryder's first documentary, I was convinced that Richard Floyd McCoy was Cooper. But I didn't look at any evidence that people might have put on that poked holes in Dan's theory. Some kind viewers pointed out some of the issues after they saw my video, and I did more research and I realized that I had made a mistake. I think that while the D.B. Cooper and the McCoy skyjacking cases have some similarities that are going to be similar to all skyjackings at the time, there are a number of important differences, and there aren't really any better reasons to believe that McCoy was Cooper any more than Rackstraw or Braden or Sheridan Peterson was. And I've done a number of videos about why I think that Sheridan Peterson and Richard Floyd McCoy and Robert Rackstraw, among others, were not Cooper. I'm leery about Ted Braden, but I don't see anything that has definitively ruled him out, so I'm more open-minded on him. Anyway, as I close, I hope you'll check out my other videos, but also do check out Shermer's book, or at least one or more interviews with him about what you might learn along the line of skills at looking at things in the most unbiased manner that you can. Otherwise, you're just going to get tainted results. Okay, that's all for today. As always, please do subscribe. Hit that subscribe button, click the like button, and leave a comment. I really want to hear from you, and I read all of the comments eventually. And if you have something important to say that I think that will be of value to my other viewers, I'll often put your questions or comments in further videos. Okay, this has been the Anthony R. Mill Show. Thanks again for watching.